When the Council shut its doors, humanity opened its own, an empire was born. The Galactic Council chambers had never felt so cold, despite housing representatives from 47 different species across the known galaxy. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the human delegation podium, her hands steady despite the weight of what was about to unfold. Around her, alien voices chittered, clicked, and hummed in languages that had taken humanity decades to learn. The Korthari speaker, a towering insectoid creature with crystalline wings, raised one of its 4 arms for silence. Its compound eyes reflected the chamber's harsh lighting as it spoke through the universal translator. The motion before us today concerns the continued membership of the human species in this esteemed council. Sarah felt her heart sink, though she maintained her diplomatic composure. 3 months of negotiations, countless meetings, and careful relationship building had led to this moment. The humans had known this day might come, but the reality still stung. The charges against humanity were numerous and damning in the eyes of the Council. Territorial expansion beyond agreed boundaries, military buildup that exceeded defensive necessities. Most critically, the development of weapons technology that several species deemed unnecessarily destructive. The humans called them railguns and plasma cannons. The Council called them instruments of terror. The Vexani delegation has documented 17 instances of human vessels crossing into restricted space sectors, continued the speaker. The jellyfish-like Vexani representative pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed deep displeasure. Their explanation of exploration and research rings hollow when these vessels carry enough firepower to level entire cities. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying across the chamber with practiced authority. Honorable representatives, humanity has always been transparent about our methods and motivations. We explore because discovery drives us forward. We arm our ships because the galaxy has shown us that good intentions aren't always enough protection. A chorus of disapproving sounds erupted from various delegations. The tree-like Silnari rustled their leaves in agitation, while the aquatic depth holders released bubbles that conveyed their irritation through the translation system. The truth was more complex than either side wanted to admit. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 25 years ago as a junior member, grateful to be accepted into the vast community of spacefaring civilizations. They had followed most protocols, contributed to joint missions, and shared technological innovations that benefited everyone. But humans had also pushed boundaries that other species respected without question. When the Council designated certain star systems as observation only, human scientists argued for active research missions. When trade agreements limited resource extraction, human corporations found creative interpretations of the rules. When military regulations capped weapon effectiveness, human engineers developed systems that technically complied while dramatically exceeding the spirit of the limitations. The evidence is clear, declared the Korthari speaker. Humanity has consistently demonstrated an inability to coexist within the structured framework that has maintained galactic peace for over 3,000 years. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, spoke with voices like singing crystal. Their pattern of behavior suggests fundamental incompatibility with council principles. They seek to impose their will upon the cosmos rather than finding harmony within it. Sarah had expected this moment, had prepared for it, but the words still cut deep. She looked around the chamber at species humanity had tried to befriend, trade partners they had hoped to build lasting relationships with, and alien civilizations they had genuinely admired and learned from. If that is the Council's decision, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening, then humanity will respect it. We will withdraw from Council space and territories as requested. The relief in the chamber was palpable. Several delegations that had remained silent throughout the proceedings now showed signs of approval. The crisis had been resolved without bloodshed, without the need for enforcement actions that might have spiraled into something larger. But as Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave the chamber that had been humanity's gateway to the galaxy, she felt something else stirring within her. Not shame or disappointment, but something much more dangerous to the Council's carefully maintained order. She felt liberation. The walk back to the human delegation's quarters felt longer than usual. The corridors of the massive space station that housed the Council were filled with aliens who now looked at the human representatives differently. Some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction, but most with simple indifference now that the human problem had been solved. Sarah's team gathered in their temporary offices, faces grim but not defeated. Military Attaché Colonel James Rodriguez spoke first, his scarred face set in hard lines. "How long do we have?" 6 standard months to withdraw all human assets from Council space, Sarah replied, settling into her chair for what might be the last time. "All trade agreements are terminated immediately. All joint research projects are suspended. All diplomatic privileges are revoked." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the delegation's chief science advisor, shook her head in disgust. 25 years of cooperation, and they throw it away over territorial disputes and weapon specifications. Do they think making us outcasts will somehow make the galaxy safer? They think removing the unpredictable element will restore their precious balance, Colonel Rodriguez replied. They've had their little club running smoothly for millennia, and humans represent chaos they can't control or predict. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already working through implications and possibilities. The question now is what humanity does next. We can retreat back to our corner of the galaxy, accept isolation, and focus on our own development. Or, she let the word hang in the air, and everyone in the room understood what she wasn't saying directly. The Council had made a critical error in judgment. They had assumed that expelling humanity would solve their problem, that removing humans from their structured system would restore the order they prized above all else. But they had fundamentally misunderstood what drove humanity forward. Humans didn't explore space because they needed permission. They didn't develop new technologies because regulations encouraged it. They didn't build ships and weapons because the Council approved of such things. They did all of these things because challenge and discovery were woven into their very nature. The Council had just removed all the restrictions that had been holding humanity back. "We need to contact Earth immediately," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new tone that her team recognized. It was the voice she used when she was no longer thinking like a diplomat trying to maintain relationships, but like a human being who had just been told that the gloves were off. "What do we tell them?" Dr. Vasquez asked. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport that looked out into the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Thousands of stars glittered in the darkness, and for the first time in years, when the Council shut its doors, humanity opened its own, an empire was born. Admiral Catherine Wells stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the most ambitious military mobilization in human history unfold on the tactical displays around her. 6 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum, and humanity had not wasted a single day. The response to their expulsion had surprised everyone, including many humans themselves. Rather than retreat into isolation or attempt desperate negotiations for readmission, humanity had chosen a third path that no species in Council history had ever attempted. They had decided to build something better. The first signs of this new direction had appeared within weeks of Sarah Chen's final report from the Council station. Corporate boards that had been operating under Council trade restrictions suddenly found themselves free to pursue any market they could reach. Military contractors, who had been designing weapons to meet Council specifications, began developing systems limited only by physics and imagination. Most significantly, the colonial administration had lifted virtually every restriction on expansion and settlement. Status report, Admiral Wells commanded, her eyes scanning the streams of data flowing across the main display. Captain Torres, her operations officer, consulted his tablet before responding. 67 new colonies established in the last 5 months, 43 mining operations active in previously restricted sectors. The industrial output from the Titan foundries has increased by 300%. Those numbers only told part of the story. What they didn't convey was the transformation in human society itself. For 25 years, humanity had tried to fit into the Council's vision of galactic civilization. They had accepted limits on their expansion, restrictions on their technology, and regulations on their methods of doing business. They had tried to be the kind of species the Council wanted them to be. The expulsion had liberated them from that effort. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as Director of External Relations for the newly formed Human Colonial Authority, entered the command center carrying a sealed data packet. Her diplomatic career with the Council was over, but her work was just beginning. "The intelligence reports from our deep space reconnaissance missions," she announced, handing the packet to Admiral Wells. "You're going to want to read this privately." Admiral Wells took the packet and walked to her private office, Sarah following close behind. Once the door sealed, Wells opened the packet and began reading. Her expression grew more serious with each page. "These surveys are accurate?" she asked finally. Sarah nodded grimly. "Triple-checked by independent teams, the Council has been sitting on some of the richest resource deposits in the galaxy, star systems with enough rare minerals to fuel industrial expansion for centuries, habitable worlds that could support billions of colonists, energy sources that make our current fusion plants look like campfires." Admiral Wells set down the report and stared out the viewport at the blue curve of Earth below. "And they've kept them empty, designated them as preservation zones or sacred spaces, while member species struggle with resource shortages and overcrowding." The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained stability not through prosperity and growth, but through careful management of scarcity. They had convinced dozens of species that limited resources required limited expansion, that peace could only be maintained through strict territorial boundaries and regulated development. But the human reconnaissance missions had revealed the lie behind that philosophy. The galaxy wasn't running short of resources or habitable space. The Council had simply chosen to leave vast regions undeveloped in the name of balance and harmony. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Our deep space monitors have been picking up communications from several Council member species. Apparently, our expansion activities have been noticed." She activated a holographic display that showed a map of the local galactic region. Human territory was marked in blue, Council space in green, and newly established human colonies in bright yellow. The pattern was unmistakable. In 6 months, humanity had expanded further and faster than most species managed in decades. More importantly, they had done so efficiently and successfully. Every colony was thriving, every mining operation was profitable, every new outpost was secure and growing. "The Korthari delegation has filed 3 formal complaints about our aggressive expansion," Sarah reported with a slight smile. "The Vexani are demanding that the Council take action to contain us, and at least 6 minor species have quietly sent us trade proposals." Admiral Wells leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "They're starting to question why they accepted Council limitations in the first place." The truth was that humanity had stumbled upon the Council's greatest vulnerability. For millennia, they had maintained control not through superior force or technology, but through the assumption that their way was the only way. Member species accepted restrictions because they believed those restrictions were necessary for survival and prosperity. But humanity was proving that assumption wrong. The human colonies weren't just surviving outside Council space, they were thriving. Human mining operations weren't just extracting resources, they were doing so more efficiently than anything the Council had ever achieved. Human exploration wasn't just mapping new territories. It was discovering opportunities that the Council had deliberately ignored. "What's the status of Project Prometheus?" Admiral Wells asked. Sarah's expression grew serious. "The research teams are ahead of schedule. Dr. Vasquez says they'll have working prototypes within 3 months." Project Prometheus was humanity's answer to one of the Council's most fundamental control mechanisms. For 3,000 years, the Council had maintained a monopoly on faster-than-light communication technology. The message burst system that allowed instant communication across galactic distances was a Council invention, closely guarded and strictly controlled. Every species in Council space depended on that system for coordination between their scattered worlds. When humanity was expelled, they lost access to it, which the Council assumed would severely handicap any expansion efforts. Instead, human scientists had simply developed their own system. The new human communication network wouldn't just match Council capabilities, it would exceed them. Faster transmission speeds, longer range, and most importantly, it would be completely independent of Council infrastructure. "There's something else," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Our monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in the Rigel sector." Admiral Wells frowned. The Rigel sector was deep in Council space, home to one of their most important administrative centers. "What kind of activity?" "Ship movements, large scale. The depth holders are mobilizing their entire fleet, and they're being joined by Korthari battle groups. Our intelligence suggests they're planning some kind of joint operation." The implications sent a chill down Admiral Wells's spine. The Council rarely used military force, preferring diplomatic pressure and economic sanctions to maintain order. If they were mobilizing fleets, it meant they viewed humanity's expansion as an existential threat to their authority. "They're going to try to stop us," she said quietly. Sarah nodded. "The question is how far they're willing to go. Military action against a former member species would be unprecedented, but our success is threatening the fundamental assumptions their entire system is built on." Admiral Wells stood and walked back to the main command center, Sarah following behind her. The tactical displays showed the current status of human space: dozens of thriving colonies, hundreds of ships engaged in trade and exploration, millions of humans building new lives beyond the boundaries that had once constrained them. In 6 months, humanity had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. They had successfully established an independent civilization that not only when the Council shut its doors, humanity opened its own, an empire was born. The Battle of Kepler's Gate would later be remembered as the moment when the old galactic order died and something entirely new was born in its place. Admiral Catherine Wells watched the tactical display as the largest military engagement in 3 millennia unfolded around the strategic choke point that connected the Council's core territories to the expanding frontier. 18 months had passed since humanity's expulsion from the Council, and what had begun as aggressive expansion had evolved into something far more significant. The human colonial authority now administered over 200 worlds, controlled the most productive mining operations in 3 sectors, and commanded the largest independent military force in galactic history. More importantly, they were no longer alone. "Admiral, the Zekhai delegation is requesting permission to establish their forward command post in the Delta Quadrant," reported Captain Torres from his position at the communications station. Admiral Wells nodded her approval. The Zekhai were the 7th species to formally withdraw from the Council and align themselves with humanity's growing coalition. Their decision had triggered a cascade of similar declarations from nearly 24 other member species who had finally decided that Council restrictions were holding them back from their true potential. The Council's response had been swift and predictable. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and ultimately, the military force that was now bearing down on Kepler's Gate. 3 council fleets, representing 15 different species and over 1,000 combat vessels, had assembled to put an end to what they called the Human Rebellion once and for all. They still didn't understand what they were really facing. Dr. Elena Vasquez materialized on the bridge via holographic projection from the research station orbiting Kepler's primary star. Admiral, Project Prometheus is fully operational. We have real-time communication links established with every human colony and allied fleet. The Council's jamming efforts are having no effect whatsoever. The communication advantage was just one of many technological superiority gaps that had emerged during humanity's 18 months of unrestricted development. Without Council regulations limiting their research, human scientists and engineers had achieved breakthroughs that had been considered impossible under the old system. The ships now defending Kepler's gate were armed with weapons that exceeded anything in the Council's arsenal. Their defensive systems were based on principles that Council scientists had never explored. Most significantly, their crews were motivated by something the Council had never fully understood: the absolute determination of beings who had been told they couldn't achieve something and had chosen to prove that assumption wrong. "Contact from the Council fleet," reported Lieutenant Zhang from the communications station. "The Korthari Admiral is requesting to speak with you directly." Admiral Wells considered for a moment, then nodded. "Put him through." The massive insectoid appeared on the main screen, his crystalline wings catching the light as he spoke. "Admiral Wells, I am Admiral Thekvor of the Council Enforcement Division. You are in violation of the territorial accords established 3,000 years ago. Withdraw your forces immediately, and the Council may consider clemency for your colonies." Admiral Wells smiled coldly. "Admiral Thekvor, with respect, those accords were written by species who had never met humanity. We didn't agree to them, we weren't consulted on them, and we see no reason to be bound by them now." The Korthari's compound eyes reflected confusion and anger. "You cannot simply ignore 3 millennia of galactic law because it inconveniences you." "Watch us," Admiral Wells replied, and cut the connection. The first shots of the battle were fired by Council forces, exactly as human intelligence had predicted. The Council had convinced themselves that they were dealing with a rebellion that could be crushed through superior numbers and righteous authority. They had no understanding that they were facing the birth of an entirely new kind of galactic civilization. The engagement lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete withdrawal of Council forces. Not because they were destroyed, but because they were utterly outclassed. Human weapon systems penetrated their shields with ease. Human ships maneuvered with a precision and coordination that Council formations couldn't match. Most devastatingly, human tactics were based on principles of rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving that the Council's rigid command structure simply couldn't counter. But the real victory wasn't measured in ships destroyed or territory captured. The real victory was measured in the signals that began flooding human communication networks as the battle ended. "Admiral," Captain Torres reported, his voice filled with amazement, "we're receiving formal withdrawal notices from the Council. 12 species in the last hour alone. The Battle of Kepler's Gate had been broadcast across the galaxy through the human communication network. Billions of beings who had been told for centuries that Council authority was absolute had watched a human fleet defeat the most powerful military force in galactic history without suffering a single casualty. The message was clear. The Council was not invincible, their restrictions were not necessary, and there were alternatives to their version of galactic civilization. Sarah Chen, now serving as president of the Human Colonial Authority, joined Admiral Wells on the bridge as reports continued to stream in. The political implications of the battle were even more significant than the military ones. "The Ethereal Collective has announced their intention to pursue independent development," Sarah reported. "The Silnari are demanding renegotiation of all resource allocation agreements. Even the depth holders are questioning the Council's territorial restrictions. Admiral Wells nodded, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. The Council's authority had been based on the assumption that their way was the only way to maintain peace and prosperity in the galaxy. But humanity had demonstrated that not only was another way possible, it was superior in every measurable way. The human colonies were more prosperous than Council worlds. Human technology was advancing faster than anything the Council had achieved in centuries. Human society was more dynamic, more innovative, and more resilient than the carefully regulated civilizations that the Council had been managing for 3,000 years. "What's the status of the other systems?" Admiral Wells asked. "The Centauri colonies are reporting successful completion of terraforming operations on 4 new worlds," Sarah replied, consulting her data tablet. "The mining operations in the Vega sector have discovered deposits of rare elements that dwarf anything in Council space. The research stations are making breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel that could revolutionize transportation across the galaxy." It had taken humanity less than 2 years to build something that surpassed what the Council had achieved in 3 millennia, not because humans were inherently superior, but because they had been willing to abandon the artificial restrictions that had been holding galactic civilization back. The Council had made the fundamental error of assuming that stability required stagnation, that peace could only be maintained through careful control of growth and development. They had built a system designed to prevent change, and for thousands of years, it had worked exactly as intended. But humanity represented something that their system had never encountered, a species that viewed challenges as opportunities rather than threats, that saw restrictions as problems to be solved rather than natural limitations to be accepted. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler's Gate, the Galactic Council officially dissolved, not through conquest or revolution, but through simple irrelevance. 2/3 of their former member species had chosen to join the growing human alliance, while the remainder had declared independence to pursue their own paths of development. The old system of carefully managed scarcity and regulated growth was replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly free civilization where species were limited only by their imagination and determination. Admiral Wells stood in the command center of New Geneva Station, the capital of what had become known as the Terran Empire, watching the construction of the largest space-based city in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species moved through the shipping lanes, carrying goods and people between hundreds of worlds that were all connected by the principles humanity had introduced: unrestricted exploration, unlimited development, and the absolute belief that any challenge could be overcome through ingenuity and effort. The Council had shut its doors to humanity, thinking they were removing a disruptive element from their carefully balanced system. Instead, they had created something that would reshape the entire galaxy, a civilization that refused to accept that things couldn't be better, faster, stronger, and more prosperous than they had ever been before. An empire wasn't built through conquest or dominion, but through the simple demonstration that there was a better way to live among the stars. And when the rest of the galaxy saw that better way, they chose it for themselves. The age of artificial limitations was over. The age of human possibility had begun, vived outside the Council's system, but actively competed with it. The Council had expected humanity to quietly accept exile and fade into insignificance. Instead, they had created a growing example of what was possible when species refused to accept artificial limitations on their growth and development. "Send a priority message to all colony commanders," Admiral Wells ordered. "Full defensive posture. If the Council wants to test our resolve, they're going to discover exactly what humanity is capable of when we stop trying to play by their rules." The message went out through humanity's new communication network, reaching every human outpost and colony in a matter of minutes. The response was immediate and universal. Humanity would not retreat, would not accept defeat, and would not allow the Council to dictate their future. The Council had shut its doors to humanity, thinking they were solving a problem. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. A species with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. She saw them not as destinations that required Council approval to visit, but as opportunities waiting to be claimed. "We tell them that the Council has made their choice," she said quietly. "And now, humanity will make ours." The message burst, traveled faster than any physical ship could move, carrying Sarah's report across the light years between the Council station and Earth in a matter of hours. By the time it reached humanity's home system, word was already spreading through the colonies, the research stations, the military outposts, and the corporate headquarters that had been chafing under Council restrictions for over 2 decades. The reaction was not what the Council would have expected.